welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling, well, one of the most dramatic and frankly terrifying stories out there. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah from Genesis 19.
It's a story everyone sort of knows or thinks they know. Fire, brimstone.
Exactly, that image of fire raining down. But if you actually read it, questions jump out immediately. What exactly happened there? What was this infamous sin?
And there's this incredibly odd bit of grammar right in the middle of the destruction scene.
Right, we have to talk about that. So our mission today is to unpack all of this. We've got ancient theological debates, some really cutting-edge archaeology science papers.
It's quite a mix. We're looking at how people, both ancient and modern, grapple with divine justice, agency, and, well, a catastrophe that seems almost unbelievable. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with that weird verse, Genesis 19.24. It feels clumsy.
It does. In many translations, it reads something like, "Then Jehovah rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven."
Jehovah raining fire from Jehovah. It sounds redundant, maybe even like a mistake. Why phrase it like that?
Well, it's bothered people for centuries. And, when something in the text looks odd, it tends to generate a lot of interpretive energy.
So what are the main ways people have tried to explain this?
Broadly, two major lines of thought pop up in the commentaries. One, particularly strong in some early Christian circles, saw this as a hint of the Trinity.
Ah, okay. So like God the Son doing the raining, getting the fire from God the Father.
That's the idea. The first Jehovah is the Son, the agent, and the second Jehovah in heaven is the Father, the source. It maps onto that theological structure.
Makes sense as an interpretation, I guess. What's the alternative?
The other view, held by commentators like Calvin or Keel, sees it as a literary device. They called it emphatica repetitio.
Emphatic repetition, so just for emphasis.
Pretty much. The idea is the repetition hammers home that this was God's doing. Directly, miraculously, not just some random natural event or accident.
To make sure you don't miss the point that Jehovah, and only Jehovah, is responsible.
Exactly. And you do see similar kinds of maybe stylistic redundancies elsewhere. Genesis 1.27 mentions God's image twice when describing humanity's creation. It underlines the importance.
Okay, that also makes sense. But you mentioned something else, an ancient Hebrew concept that sort of unlocks this differently.
Yes, and this is, I think, really fascinating. It's the concept of shalaya.
Shalaya. Okay, what does that mean?
It translates roughly as agency or representation. It's a fundamental legal and theological idea back then. Basically, it meant that an agent, someone sent to act on another's behalf, they legally adopted the principal's name, titles, and authority. They spoke as if they were the person who sent them.
So the messenger carries the full weight and even the name of the sender.
Precisely. Think of an ambassador speaking for a king. So if you apply shalaya to Genesis 19.24,
Then the first Jehovah, the one doing the raining.
could be the agent. Perhaps the angel, the divine messenger who was just talking with Lot moments before, he's acting as Jehovah.
And the second Jehovah, the one out of heaven.
Is the ultimate source.
Yeah.
The principle. God authorizing the action from heaven.
Huh. That completely reframes it. It's not about proving the Trinity from one verse. It's about understanding how divine authority was understood to be delegated. Like with the angel leading the Exodus, who also bears God's name, it's about representation.
Exactly. It fits really well with how agency worked in that world.
Okay, fascinating. Now, let's shift gears completely. From the theology of the words to the physical reality on the ground. For ages, skeptics just said, come on, fire from heaven, pure myth.
Right, too fantastic to be historical.
But recently, archaeology around the Dead Sea, it's throwing a massive wrench in that skepticism, isn't it?
It really is. The key has always been finding the location relative to Zoar.
Zoar, remind us why that's important.
Zor, or Bela, was the town Lot fled to. It was explicitly spared from the destruction. And its location is actually pretty well attested in ancient sources, like the Medaba map and Josephus.
So it acts like an anchor point on the map. It tells you where not to look, or rather where the destruction starts.
Exactly, on the eastern shore of the Dead Sea. And when archaeologists started digging in the right area, particularly at sites like Numeira and, crucially, Tal el Hammam,
What did they find?
evidence of a massive, sudden, incredibly violent destruction event,
Oh.
around 1650 BCE, give or take.
So the right time period for the patriarchs.
Yes. And at Numeira, possibly Gomorrah, they found things like complete human skeletons crushed under collapsed walls, people caught instantly. Not a siege, not a normal fire.
Like Pompeii, almost? Just sudden death?
Sort of, yeah. But the evidence at Tal el-Hammam, which is a very strong candidate for Sodom, is even stranger.
This is the melted pottery.
This is melted pottery. We're talking about pottery fragments glazed into glass and other materials showing exposure to extreme heat.
How extreme?
Temperatures estimated between, say, 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit up to maybe over 4,000 degrees.
Whoa. That's hotter than volcanic lava, isn't it? Hotter than most industrial processes even.
Way hotter. You just don't get that kind of heat from a normal fire or even an earthquake causing fires. You need something else. Something with immense energy.
Which leads us to this big 2021 study. 21 authors, a major interdisciplinary effort.
Right. And their conclusion, based on all this evidence, the melted materials, the shockwave damage, the layer of salt contamination points to a meteoric airburst.
An airburst, like Tunguska in Siberia back in 1908.
Exactly like Tunguska, but over a populated region. They theorize an icy space rock, maybe 50 meters across, exploded a few miles up in the atmosphere.
The sheer force of that.
Unimaginable. The study estimates the blast was about 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb.
1,000 times.
It would have vaporized buildings, people, everything in the immediate vicinity. The shockwave would flatten structures for miles, and the heat flash explains the melted pottery. It also likely splashed superheated brine from the Dead Sea across the landscape.
Which explains the salt layer and why the land became infertile for centuries. The study estimated casualties.
Yeah, potentially wiping out 40,000 to 65,000 people across the whole affected area in an instant.
Okay, hold on. If it was a meteor, a natural, albeit catastrophic, event, doesn't that contradict the whole Jehovah raining fire thing we just talked about? The divine agency.
That's the tension, isn't it? How do you reconcile a scientific explanation with a theological one? But it's not necessarily contradictory. Even traditional views acknowledge the region was prone to natural disasters, like earthquakes and bitumen fires.
So the airburst could be seen as the mechanism God used.
That's one way to look at it. The scale, the suddenness, the fiery nature, it matches the biblical description uncannily well. You mentioned Dr. John Bergsma, a Catholic theologian.
Yes, his reaction was striking.
He apparently used to be skeptical about the historicity, but seeing the evidence, especially the melted pottery, he basically said it forced him to conclude that this seemingly outlandish story was suddenly shown to be a historical event. The mechanism doesn't negate the possibility of divine purpose behind it, you see.
It makes fire from heaven terrifyingly literal. Okay, so if the destruction was real, this massive instant catastrophe, then why? Why did it happen? Which brings us to the sin of Sodom.
Ah, yes, the sin. And for centuries, especially in the West, the focus has almost exclusively been on one thing.
The incident with Lot's visitors, the angels. When the men of the city demand to know them, which is interpreted as homosexual assault.
Right. And that interpretation led directly to the term sodomy becoming synonymous with certain sexual acts.
That's the common understanding. But when you look at other parts of the Bible, especially the prophets and later Jewish tradition, the picture gets broader, doesn't it?
Much broader. And it's often overlooked. The focus shifts quite dramatically away from just sexual sin towards issues of social justice, or rather, profound injustice.
Like in Ezekiel.
Exactly. Ezekiel chapter 16 is very explicit. He lists Sodom's iniquity, pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. Okay, so arrogance and wealth.
But then he adds the kicker.
He does. The core ethical failure was they did not strengthen the hand of the poor and needy.
So it wasn't just what they did, it was what they failed to do. They had plenty, they were comfortable, idle even, but they ignored the suffering around them.
That's the prophetic indictment. And rabbinic traditions really run with this. They paint Sodom as embodying the absolute worst of inhospitality and lack of charity. Their defining philosophy, according to some traditions, was what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours.
Which sounds almost reasonable on the surface.
Until you realize it means actively refusing to help anyone. It's a complete rejection of community, of compassion. If someone is starving, well, that's their problem.
It's radical selfishness codified into a social structure.
Precisely. And there are these grim stories in the tradition, like the one about Lot's daughter, Pelleted.
What happened to her?
The story goes, she secretly gave bread to a poor man who had entered the city. When the authorities found out, she was executed for it, burned alive.
Executed for charity, for hospitality.
Yes, not for sexual transgression, but for violating Sodom's core principle of radical non-charity. The tradition says her cry for justice reached God and was, like, the final straw. It proved the city was irredeemably corrupt.
Wow. So the abomination wasn't just one type of act, but this deep-seated social rot. this calculated cruelty and contempt for the vulnerable.
That's the picture you get from those later sources. While the incident with the angels might have been the immediate trigger for judgment, the underlying sickness was this profound ethical failure.
Okay, so within this context of citywide judgment, this instant fiery end, there's one more individual story we need to touch on, Lot's wife.
Ah, yes. Probably the most haunting image from the whole narrative. The pillar of salt.
The command was simple, right? Flee, don't stop, and absolutely do not look back.
Crystal clear instructions from the angels. Escape for your life. Look straight ahead. But then, Genesis says Lot's wife looked back from behind him. And poof, pillar of salt.
It seems so harsh for just looking. Was it just curiosity? Why such a final punishment?
Well, it's definitely disobedience to a direct command. But the theological interpretations dig much deeper than mere curiosity. Looking back wasn't just a glance. It symbolized something profound.
Like what? Like lingering attachment?
Exactly, a failure to let go. Her body was moving forward, escaping, but her heart, her desire, was still back there in Sodom with the life she knew, however wicked.
It's like the Israelites in the desert, looking back longingly towards Egypt, towards slavery, because at least it was familiar.
That's a very common comparison. It represents a failure to fully commit to the escape, to the new life being offered. She couldn't make the break. And the pillar of salt part.
Oh.
There's some fascinating commentary on that.
Oh, beyond just being preserved in her disobedience.
Yes. Think about the metaphor of being the salt of the earth. Salt, in ancient contexts, was about covenant, purity, preservation. But it often worked by dissolving, by sacrificing itself to flavor or preserve something else.
Okay.
By becoming a rigid, unmoving pillar of salt, she embodies the opposite. She refused to dissolve her old self, her attachments. She stood fixed in her past, in her self-love, unable to move forward into the covenant promise. Her becoming salt ironically signifies her failure to be salt in the way she was meant to.
That's a powerful image. Rigidity versus sacrifice. Choosing the past and becoming stuck there, literally.
And it's such a potent warning that Jesus himself uses it.
Right, in Luke's gospel, he just says,
Remember Lot's wife. Just those 3 words, a stark warning to his followers. Don't get caught looking back at the old life, the old world, when you're called to move forward into the kingdom. Don't lose focus.
So let's try to pull all these threads together. We've gone from this tricky verse about God's name
And how the concept of shalaya, or agency, helps make sense of it.
to the absolutely stunning archaeological and scientific evidence for a real catastrophic event, likely a meteoric airburst around 1650 BCE.
Yeah, evidence so strong it's making people rethink the historical basis of the story.
And then we unpack the sin itself, moving beyond just the sexual interpretation to see this deeper layer emphasized by the prophets and rabbis.
This profound social injustice, this failure of compassion, this systemic cruelty.
It really paints a complex picture. The story of Sodom, at its core, it feels like a confrontation with judgment, yes, but also with choice, with consequences. Lot gets out, but his story afterwards isn't exactly heroic. It contrasts sharply with Abraham's path of faith.
It really does. Lot's escape leads to, well, compromised beginnings for his descendants.
Which leaves us with maybe one final thought for you, the listener, to wrestle with. We touched on how some sources suggest God judges based on who a person is as he is there, right in that moment, like with Ishmael getting mercy instantaneously.
Yes, an immediate assessment.
So, given this evidence for an instantaneous destruction, an airburst vaporizing everything in a second, what does it mean to be judged not on your whole life's balance sheet, but on who you are, what your heart is fixed on in that final split second? Like Lot's wife, whose final conscious choice was apparently to look back, what does that kind of instantaneous judgment imply?
A challenging thought indeed, about where our focus truly lies, especially when facing the ultimate test.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.